Hey everyone, today's video is all about Christmas DIYs. I'll be sharing my top 30 favorites from both recent and past projects. Most of the supplies I use are from Dollar Tree, making them all incredibly budget friendly. I really hope these DIYs inspire your holiday creativity, so let's get started. I'm going to be using this wooden peace sign that I got at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to add some color with Waverly Antique Wax. I use a cloth to apply that on all over, and then I wipe out the excess. I turn it over and do the back as well. I'm going to be using these beautiful Christmas ribbons that I got at the Dollar Tree, and they are about 2 to 2.5 inches in width. I'm going to be placing the ribbons behind the letters, so I turn the sign over and cut out a piece of ribbon to go behind each letter. And I'm going to alternate the ribbons for each letter. The burlap ribbon was a little too small for the letter C, so I decided to use that for the letter E. Then I apply a little hot glue around the edge of the ribbon to secure it in place. The ribbon didn't quite fit for the last letter, so I cut a smaller strip to cover the gap, and it blended together nicely. The sign was a little bent, so I grabbed some long bamboo sticks. You can also use dowels, and I hot glue them on the back, pressing them down to flatten the sign. I'm going to lean this against the wall, but you can certainly hang it as well if you prefer. And this is how it turned out. So quick and easy and so adorable. I grabbed 4 of these wooden pallets at Dollar Tree, and these are about 4 by 6 inches. They do have a slightly larger pallet. I didn't think about it until I was done with this project. They're called hanging wood fence, and they're about 5 by 7, so if you want to make a larger version of this project, you can get those instead. I'm going to glue these together, but before I do that, I want to add some color. I'm going to mix together khaki and territorial beige from Apple Barrel. I really love mixing these two together because you get such a beautiful, warm, earthy beige color. I want it to go on like a stain, so I add some water to thin it down. So I brush the mixture on top of the palettes and then I wipe it down before it dries. I really love using acrylic paints to make stain because not only is it cost effective, but you're also not dealing with harmful fumes. Since I will be gluing the palettes together with 2 on top and 2 on the bottom, I make sure to avoid applying the stain on the areas where I'm going to glue. To glue, I'm going to be using wood glue. I get these at Dollar Tree, but you can definitely use your glue of choice. So I apply the glue on the ends and then I push them together like so, and I'm just using a little wood block just to make sure that the ends are flush. And then I glue the other 2 the same way. And then I apply glue on the long sides of the 2 that were glued together, and then I bring everything together. To make sure the joints don't snap apart, I'm reinforcing with some popsicle sticks, and I'm just using hot glue to bond them together. I do make sure to place them in areas that's not going to be seen on the other side. So I apply the popsicle sticks vertically and a couple horizontally as well. Once everything is dried, I'm going to do some stenciling. I got this 11-piece Christmas stencil pack on Amazon, and I'm going to use the snowflake one with the word Merry Christmas in the center. I like this pack because these stencils are quite large. I'll have it linked in my description box below if you want to check it out. I'm going to paint them using a couple chalk paints, white and the shade Crimson from Waverly. First, I'm going to cover up Merry Christmas because I'm going to paint that a red, so I use some painter's tape to cover up that area. To apply the white chalk paint on the snowflake, I do make sure to dab out as much excess paint on a paper towel that's on the stencil brush, and then I apply it in circular motions. Now, I don't really mind it not being completely opaque in the application because I do want some of that wood showing through underneath the snowflake. So once I finish applying the white chalk paint, I'm going to switch out the painter's tape and I'm just going to cover up the edges of the snowflake. Before applying the crimson red on Merry Christmas, I do make sure to dab out as much excess paint that's on the brush. And this will help prevent any bleeding underneath the stencil. And then I just apply it over Merry Christmas in circular motions. This time I do want it to be completely opaque. Now I think these palettes make a beautiful frame for Christmas decor, and really stenciling is just one of the many ways you can craft with it. Once I'm done applying the paint, I remove the stencil and this DIY is done. You can embellish with some greenery and bows, but I really love it just like that. Make a ribbon-wrapped wreath using this foam floral ring and a couple Christmas ribbons from the Dollar Tree. I'm going to wrap the foam with a burlap ribbon, and I wrap it tightly, pulling the sides so it doesn't bunch up. Once the foam is wrapped, I add a little hot glue to secure the end in place. I want to add a wooden sign to the wreath, and I'm going to use some leftover bamboo sticks from a prior DIY, already painted and lightly sanded. I measure the length of the wreath and I trim 5 sticks down. I space the sticks apart just enough to fit the wooden Mary sign, and then I take another bamboo stick and lay it vertically next to the others, and then I mark and trim 2 to that size. Then I glue the ends of the long sticks onto the 2 smaller sticks, like so, spacing them out evenly. I apply some antique wax on the wooden Mary sign. I believe I got this at Dollar Tree last year, but you can definitely customize and put whatever word you would like. Now there are so many ways to make a bow, and I'm going to show you a very easy way to make one. First, I'm going to lay out some ribbon and fold it over to the width that I want, while also tucking in about ½ an inch on one end like so, and I cut that piece off. And then I cut off another strip of ribbon. I fold one of the strips and apply a little hot glue on the end to hold it in place. For the second strip of ribbon, I fold it a little bit smaller than the first, and then I apply hot glue to hold that in place. I place the smaller ribbon on top of the longer one, and then I gather it right in the center. I take a little piece of pipe cleaner to secure the 2 together, and then I snip off the extra piece. You can also use floral wire or even zip ties. I cut off another strip of ribbon, and this will make the tail of the bow. So the length depends on how long you want that to be. And then I cut off a couple more inches for the center. I fold the smaller strip like so, and then I apply a little hot glue to the back center of the bow. And then I wrap the small strip around the center and then add glue to secure the opposite end. And then I cut off the excess piece. I position the tail the way I want it to look, and then I glue that to the back. And finally, I finish off the ends, and that's it. I fluff it up as much as I can. This is not a wired ribbon. It would have been even better if it was, but it still turned out beautiful. And now I hot glue down the bamboo sticks right in the center, and then I embellish with these gold painted picks. So I just hot glue them down, making sure to leave some space in the center where I'm going to place the bow. I glue the bow down and I add these mini pine cones and berries in the areas around the bow. I glue down the Mary sign and attach some jute cord on top to hang, and we are done. I really love the way this wreath turned out. I love the different patterns and textures of the ribbons, and I definitely love adding the wood element to it. For the next DIY, I got 3 of these 5.5 by 7.5 inch wooden rectangles at Dollar Tree. I'm going to add some color, and I will be mixing together khaki and territorial beige from Apple Barrel and thinning it down with a little bit of water so that it goes on like a stain. So I just apply the color with a rag, and then I wipe the color on all over, including the side. Any color will definitely work for this DIY, like a darker wood tone or white or even red. So after applying the color, I wipe it down to remove the excess paint so that you can see more of the wood underneath. I got this pack of decorative paper at Hobby Lobby. It was 50% off and the patterns are just so beautiful. This is the Winterberry pack. I really couldn't just pick one, so I picked out 3 and the colors just complement each other perfectly. I'll be trimming the paper to fit 3 of these 4x6-inch wood pieces. I got this on Temu, but you can also substitute these for those Dollar Tree wooden planks. I think those can work as well. So after trimming them down, I'm going to be Mod Podging them right on top of the wood. And I'm going to be doing the Mod Podge iron-on method. So first, I'm going to apply a layer of Mod Podge over the wood. I just brush on a thin layer, but I do make sure every inch of the wood is coated. And then I just let that dry completely. Once it has dried, I place the decorative paper on top of the wood. I'm lining it up because I did cut it a little too perfectly. It would have actually been better to have a little overhang because you can easily sand off the excess. Next, I grab a piece of parchment paper and carefully lay it on top of the decorative paper. And then I get my mini heat press, but if you don't have one, you can totally just use a regular iron. Set your iron to a low temperature, then gently go over the paper. The heat will warm up the Mod Podge, making it sticky again and allowing the paper to adhere smoothly. The best part is that you don't have to worry about wrinkles. This method is amazing. To seal, you can do the same thing, applying the Mod Podge on top, letting it dry, and then ironing it down. And then I hot glue each of the decorative paper onto the 5x7-inch wood. I'm going to glue the word joy onto the wood, and I got these 3 letters at Michael's. I wanted to keep it white and lightly outline the edge, so I just lightly dab some color, and I'm using khaki, and I just apply it with a small sponge brush along the edge very lightly. And finally, I hot glue down the letters on each of the wood blocks. And this adorable DIY is done. I'm going to be using this round wooden plywood from the Dollar Tree. I'm going to add some color, and I will be using Waverly Antique Wax as well as black and white acrylic paint. Honestly, I couldn't decide whether to go with the black or white, so I went with both. I'm going to divide the circle into 3 parts, and I start off by laying down 3 strips of painter's tape to the top and bottom of the circle. I apply Waverly Antique Wax on the center, and I'm just using a damp cloth to apply that all over. I am also being extra careful around the tape, making sure it doesn't seep in under the tape. Although it did, but once I painted on the acrylic paint, it did clean it up nicely. Then I remove the extra tape and I tape off the edge of the antique wax section. These rounds are a bit thin, so you can definitely double them up to make them thicker if you'd like. And then I apply the black paint on the bottom. And the white on top, again being careful not to let the paint seep underneath the painter's tape. I peel off the tape and wow, look at that, nice and clean. I bought this pack of laser cut woodwords from the Dollar Tree. It says home and it's a thick piece of wood and you get 2 of them. On the round wood, I'm going to place the word Home Sweet Home, so I'll also be using these small wooden letters which I got at Michael's. I'm going to paint the words white, and I'm using acrylic paint from Craftsmart. I am trying to be so careful not to get any paint on the sides of the word, because if I get a little paint on the sides, then I'm going to have to paint the whole thing, and I really don't want to. It is a little harder to avoid on the smaller letters, so I painted all white. Now that everything is dried, it's time to put it all together. Now the Dollar Tree has a lot of choices for Christmas florals, and they are so pretty. I will be using a couple of this frosted greenery with red berries. I want to place a nice big bow right in the top center, so I was looking for a ribbon that was black and white, and I found one. I love the pattern on this one. I take the berry stems and I hold them opposite each other, but they were a little too long, so I cut off the thick bottom. Then I gather them up and place them in opposite directions again, and I just reposition them until I like the way they look. I cut off a piece of jute twine and I wrap that around the center of the stems. I double knot it and glue that down towards the top middle. In my last video, I showed you a very simple way to make a bow, and this time I'm going to show you another way, which I find it to be a little faster once you get the hang of it. So first I pull out some ribbon. Now determine how long you want your tail to be, and then gather it on the top like so. And this will be the center of the ribbon. Then form a loop, bringing the ribbon towards the back center and pinching them together, and this will be the right side of the bow. So here you can make your adjustments, making the loops bigger or smaller. Move the tail to the side, and then you're going to form another loop on the opposite side, gathering it towards the center and making sure the loops are even. Then I twist the ribbon, making another loop, gathering it towards the center. Then twisting it again, forming another loop on the opposite side and gathering it in the center. And then I form the center loop like so, and then I just take a twist tie. You can also use pipe cleaners or zip ties, and I slide that through the small center loop and twist it in the back. I trim the ends, and that is it. You can actually make this as big as you want, adding as much loops as you like. Before I glue the bow down, I glue the words. Here I am trying to decide on the placement, so I'm just playing around with it until I like the way it looks. I glue the words down and I use a popsicle stick to make sure it goes on straight and even. And then I glue the bow on top. I pop the jute twine back in and I am done. This came out so beautiful. I love the colors, the black, white, and antique wax. Such a sweet looking sign. I love it. I'm gonna make a couple snowy candle holder jars. So I get some jars. The small one is from Dollar Tree and the larger one is an old pickle jar. I'll also be using some Epsom salt, which you can get anywhere including Dollar Tree. You'll also need some Mod Podge, and satin or matte works just fine. I'm starting with a bigger jar and I brush on the Mod Podge all over. You'll have to work fast because you don't want it drying out. But if it does, it's fine. Just go over that section again. And you'll want to apply a good amount, making sure not to miss any areas. I'm also avoiding applying the Mod Podge around the top rim because I will be adding something else on that area. So once that's completely covered, I grab a generous amount of Epsom salt and I sprinkle that over the jar, wherever the Mod Podge was applied. And I just keep sprinkling that until the jar is completely covered, and then I set that aside to dry. I do the same thing with a smaller jar, applying the Mod Podge all over as well. Because of the smaller size, this one was definitely easier to do. Then I just sprinkle on the Epsom salt all over the Mod Podge area. Now after it is dried, if there are any areas that didn't get covered or you missed it, you can go back and dab a little more Mod Podge over those areas and then sprinkle with the Epsom salt. So I just set that aside to dry. Once that's dried, I'm going to wrap some jute string around the top of the jars. The jute is from Dollar Tree, and these were slightly thicker than their usual ones. I'll be using a lot of hot glue to hold this in place because of the glass threads of the jars that's protruding out. So I do use a lot of hot glue to hold it in place and keep it from unraveling. Now you can also tie a little ribbon with the jute string before adding some embellishments. I'm going to glue some Christmas greenery on the jars right on the top. So I use a little hot glue to hold it in place, and then I top it off with a little wood slice. And I got a pack of these at Dollar Tree. Now I love it just like that, simple and rustic, but you can definitely add some mini pine cones and berries, and a little ribbon as well. I drop in some mini battery-operated tea light candles, and the simple and charming DIY is done. I'm going to make a simple wreath. I'll be using this wooden tree shape as well as this brass wreath ring from Dollar Tree. I decided to stain the tree with this water-based stain from Behr in the shade Special Walnut. So I just apply that with a cloth, applying the stain all over and then wiping out the excess. I'm going to add some stenciling on the tree. This is also from that stencil pack I used earlier, and I'll be using the snowflakes pattern. So I tape it down and I cover up the areas that I don't want to get paint on. I dip my brush in the paint and then I blot out the wet brush on a paper towel before applying it over the stencil. Now my initial plan was to stencil a row of the snowflakes towards the center of each triangle section, but unfortunately for the second row I didn't line it up where I initially meant to line it up. I was way off, and I realized that not too long after I started applying the paint, so I decided to just go with it and somehow make it work. So for the top row, I decided to just place one snowflake on top, making it like a star for the tree, and it worked out well. I'm going to add some Christmas greenery onto the wreath ring. While Dollar Tree had some really good options that would work well, I decided to use greenery from Hobby Lobby instead because many of their Christmas items like crafts and florals were 50% off, and some of the items that I got were actually even cheaper and of course better in quality than Dollar Tree. I got a couple of these pine and pinecone branch for the wreath, and I really love the look of these 18.5-inch branches. So to attach, I start by bending the stems of the branch to follow the curve of the wreath, and those do bend quite easily because of the wire inside. Next, I lay them in opposite direction and pushing them as close together as I'm able to. Then I take some wire jute cord and I wrap that around the center of the stem to hold the two together. And then I cut out some more of the wire jute cord. These are from Dollar Tree and I use them to attach the branches onto the ring. Now I ended up redoing the center because I realized I should have also wrapped that area around the ring directly instead of wrapping more wire cord over it, which would have just made it more bulky. So I just continue securing the branches onto the ring using the wired cord to attach it. I'm going to add a bow in the center, and I'll be using this beautiful red and white ribbon from Dollar Tree to make one. I got this last summer during their patriotic decor season, and I think it's just perfect for this time of year. To make a bow, first I determine how long I want my tail to be, and then I gather it on the top like so, and this will be the center of the ribbon. Then I form a loop, bringing the ribbon towards the back center and pinching them together. I move the tail to the side, and then I form another loop on the opposite side. Then I twist the ribbon, making another loop, gathering it towards the center, then twisting it again, forming another loop on the opposite side and gathering it in the center. And then I form the smaller center loop like so, and then I just take a floral wire, you can also use a zip tie or pipe cleaner, and I slide that through the small center loop, and then I twist it in the back to secure. There's a bit of excess wire in the back which I will use to secure it onto the wreath. And then I just clean up the ends of the ribbon and then I secure it in place. To attach the wooden tree, I just loop some jute string right through the top hole, but before I do that, I decided to wrap some jute string around the top, about a couple inches in width. To hang, I tie the wooden tree to the top of the wreath, and I string through wooden beads and I tie the ends of the string to make a loopy hook. And this DIY is done, and I am absolutely loving how it turned out. I will be using this beautiful 6.5-inch textured jar which I got at the Dollar Tree. I'll also be using a couple feet of this jute cord. So first I'm going to cut out about 8 strands of jute cord about 6 inch in length. I'm going to be gluing these vertically around the jar. So to glue, I just add a dab of hot glue to the top and bottom of the jar. I space them out equally. This jar has a square shape, so I start at the center of each side. And after that, I glue the corners. You can certainly glue more strands if you like as well. Then I turn it over and trim off the jute cord where it's sticking out beyond the length of the jar. Then I take some cord and wrap it a couple times around the neck of the jar, and I secure with hot glue. Then I measure and cut 2 strands of cord, which I will wrap horizontally around the jar, and I space them about 1 inch or so apart. And finally, I wrap the cord a couple times around the base. To make the handle, I will be using this wired jute cord and cotton twine from the Dollar Tree. I cut out the size I want for the handle, about 12 inches, and I shape it into a handle. And then I wrap the cotton twine on the ends. I go about 1/2 inch up and I secure it with hot glue. Then I glue that onto the jar. Since winter is coming soon, I wanted to embellish with this wooden snowflake cutout from the Dollar Tree. I paint it with white acrylic paint. Then I lightly sand it, focusing mostly on the edges. I tie the little string that it came with through the hole, and then I use a skewer to push that through the jute cord. You can definitely customize these wood cutouts depending on the season. I place this little tea light candle holder inside and I'm done. I want to make a pedestal bowl to go with the season, and there were some beautiful decorative bowls at Pottery Barn with some elements that I wanted to incorporate. And so I went to the Dollar Tree and I picked up this 2-pack of clear plastic bowls and this round plastic garden dish. So first I remove the stickers and labels and I wipe it down, and I'm going to glue them together with E6000. I turn over the small bowl and I apply glue on the outer raised edge. Then I place the plastic dish right on top, making sure it's centered. For the paint mixture, I am mixing together some chalk paint, whites, browns, and beige. I do want this to be very light with a hint of warmth. So I use more white and then I add some baking soda for texture. Then I just keep adding more color, more white and baking soda until I like the shade and texture. I brush that on the top all over with a foam brush. Then I flip it over and apply it on the bottom. I apply a couple more coats using a heat tool to expedite drying time in between. And as you apply the second and optional third layer, the more texture you will see. Also, the paint mixture is drying a bit, which thickens it up even more. Now you can stop here. This looks so beautiful already and will complement any decor style. But I want to add some gold to the pedestal, and I'm going to spray paint metallic gold on the base. So I cover up the top dish, and I just use the bottom of the other bowl to make a template so that I can easily cover up the dish. I take it outside and spray paint it, and I'm done. To make it last longer, make sure to seal it. And this turned out so stunning. I love the texture, and that gold just gives it a modern and elegant look. Dollar Tree has so many beautiful Christmas flowers and greenery, and I'm going to be making a little hanging Christmas swag using these adorable pine stems. I really like these, and they just look like they've just been picked from the snow. I'll be using about 3 to 4 of these, but you can definitely use more for a fuller swag. So first, I'm going to gather the stems, varying the heights so it kind of has a tier shape. I grabbed some nautical rope from Dollar Tree, and I'll be wrapping it around the stems. I use some hot glue to start it off and to hold it in place while I wrap. Before I finish and secure the ends, I take some jute twine and I use that to make a little loop, which I glue in the end, and this will be the hanger. I just finish it off with more hot glue to secure it in place. I thought I would add these frosted berries from this holly berry bouquet from Dollar Tree, so I just cut those out and I place a few of them on the greenery. I wasn't completely sure yet if I wanted to keep them or go without, so I didn't glue them down just yet. I place a bow right where the rope and the pine meet, and this ribbon is also from Dollar Tree, but I did get it last summer during their patriotic season. And then I add a few more pine needles above the bow, and the simple swag DIY is done. Now, if you want to create a swag with a bit more elegance and style while keeping it budget friendly, you'll like this next one. I picked up some Christmas picks at Hobby Lobby. Their Christmas items were 50% off, and the quality is just a notch better. I thought either of these would make an adorable little swag, but I thought I would go with this pine spray. I really love the color, and I think I paid just under $2 for one at Hobby Lobby. I'll be using 2 for this one, but you can certainly add more. So like the first one, I gather them together, making one a little higher than the other. I wrap the nautical rope around the stem. You can use hot glue to start it off, and some in between the ropes here and there to hold it in place. Before I get to the end, I make a little loop using some jute twine to make a hanger. And then I secure the ends with hot glue. I'm going to add a couple of these rustic gold bells. I got these at Hobby Lobby and they came in a pack of 6, and they were also 50% off. To put them together, I gather them together, placing one a few inches higher than the other, and then I wrap some jute string over the area where I'm holding them together, securing with some hot glue. And this will make that area look seamless. Now after looking at it, I decided I didn't want that nautical rope to cover the whole stem. I wanted some of it showing through, so I took it off and rewrapped it, leaving some of the stems peeking out. I also make sure to reattach the loopy hanger before hot gluing the ends. To attach the bells on the stems, I string through some jute string. These were actually a little thinner than the ones I used on the bells, and I tie them around the nautical rope, keeping in mind where I want the bells to hang. I want to add these pine cone picks from Hobby Lobby. It was a little bulky, so I pulled it apart from the stem, and I just place it right behind the bell rope, and I also secure it to the stem with some floral wire. I add some more mini pine cones, and I think these would have also looked nice if I painted a little white on it. And then I added some berries as well. I wanted to add a bow, and I had a couple satin ribbons that I wanted to try out. I really couldn't decide which one, so I tried both. These are from Walmart, and they're in the colors antique white and red wine. And this adorable little swag is done. DIY, I will be making wooden trees using a couple of these wood planks from the Dollar Tree. I love the patterns on these. I'm going to be cutting them into 9 pieces, each at a 45-degree angle on both sides so it looks like a trapezoid. And here are the measurements, with the base being the following length. So once that is cut, I'm going to be gluing them onto a paint stir stick, and you will need 2 of them. I will be painting them white, but first I sand the edges of the wood and the paint sticks to smooth it out. I will be making 2 trees, one larger than the other, so I lay the cut wood on top of the paint sticks just to see how they look and to mark the area on the paint sticks that will need to be trimmed. Now on the smaller tree, the second to the top trapezoid is a bit narrow on top, so I want to make sure to place that on the narrow part of the paint stick as well. And then I just mark the top and bottom area that I want to trim down. And once trimmed, I glue the cut wood onto the paint sticks. And this is really easy to assemble. I start from the top and work my way down. I'm using wood glue / multi-purpose glue, but you can use hot glue as well. This just gives me a little time to make sure the pieces are centered. And these cut pieces fit so nicely together. If you prefer, you can also space these out, and I think that would look beautiful as well. These wood planks do have a front and back, with the front being the smoother side compared to the back, so just be aware of that. For the smaller tree, I'm going to start off with the piece that's going to go over the narrow handle, making sure I have enough space on top to glue the small triangle. And then I glue down the bottom 2. These trees look so beautiful already. To make the base, I'm using a couple scrap 5-gallon paint stir sticks that I had and 8 tumbling tower blocks. I'm going to be trimming the blocks to fit around the base of the tree, but if you don't want to do that, you can just take 2 blocks and glue them to the front and back like so. But I will be trimming the blocks as well as the 5-gallon paint sticks to the following size. I'm using a miter box and saw, so if you're going to as well, be careful because these are small pieces. I apply glue on the bottom of the larger tree and I place the tree on top. And then I apply some glue on the base towards the front and back of the tree like so. And then I place the 1-inch blocks on there, making sure they're laying flat. And then I glue the 1 3/8 inch block to the left and right of the base of the tree. I want to do a whitewash on the trees, so I grabbed some paper towels and I dilute my white paint with some water. I started with a 1-to-1 ratio of paint and water, but then ended up adding a little more water to the mixture to thin it out even more. So I brushed the paint on with a foam brush and I worked in small sections because I don't want the paint to dry. Then I grab my paper towel and wipe off the wet paint. I want these trees to be white, but I still want to see the beautiful wood patterns underneath as well. So I continue brushing on the paint and then wiping it off immediately. You can definitely paint or stain whatever color you prefer. I did consider staining it as well, but in the end, I'm really happy I went with white. I added some spackle to close off any gaps and spaces, and we're done. I love how these trees turned out. The wood has a nice thickness to it, which gives it a more high-end look. And I love that it's white, yet you can still see the beautiful grains and patterns underneath. I headed to Dollar Tree and I grabbed several of their wooden Christmas trees. And I'm going to be using a total of 5 for all of today's DIYs. I also grabbed a couple of their 12-inch 1x2s. I'm going to stain the wood using acrylic paint, and I'll be mixing territorial beige and khaki from Apple Barrel. And to thin out the paint so that it does go on like a stain, I add some water and then I mix it up. So I brush that on all over, and I'm just using a brush to apply that. And then I wipe it down immediately with a paper towel before it dries to remove any excess paint. And then I turn it over and I do the same thing on the other side, just brushing on that paint mixture and then wiping it down with a paper towel before it dries. For the 1x2s, I brush on the color as well, and then I wipe it down. I will be gluing these together side by side, so I do avoid applying the paint to the areas that will be glued. I glue the 1x2s together, so I just apply some glue on the sides, and I'm using wood glue, but you can also use hot glue or a combination of the two. I picked up the stencil pack from Amazon. It's a set of 12 with various Christmas patterns, and I love the designs on these. They're really nice. I will be covering the trees with the snowflakes, so I place a stencil on top. It's not going to cover the whole tree, but it looks like the ends do connect, or so I thought. So I'm going to do a section at a time. I just use some painter's tape to hold it down just to make sure it stays in place. I'll be using just plain white acrylic paint, so I dip my brush in the paint. And a very important step to make sure it doesn't bleed underneath the stencil is to dab out as much of the paint on a paper towel so that it's almost dry to the touch. So once I'm done with this section, I peel off the stencil and I move it to the other side. But no matter how hard I tried, I just could not match up the stencils completely. There were always just a few that just were not matching up. So instead, I just decided to stencil a few at a time until the incomplete snowflakes on the edge were whole. I also covered up any areas that I didn't want to get paint on. And then from there, it was very easy to finish stenciling the rest of the snowflakes on the tree. To cover up the hole on top, I'm going to place a wooden star to cover it. And I just lightly brush on some white paint, and then I just hot glue that down. To glue the tree to the base, you can add some glue on the trunk area and then just attach it towards the back center of the 1x2s, which was what I was going to do initially. But then I changed my mind and I thought it would look a lot better resting on top so that you can see the whole tree. So I just grabbed some 1x2s and I applied a combination of wood glue and hot glue on the bottom like so. And I attached that right in the back center. And then I applied some glue on the 1x2 and then I attached the tree right in front of that. To embellish, I wanted to add a little wreath, and I picked up this wired berry garland at Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use the whole thing just the way it is as my wreath. I like the way it looks, and it's already a perfect circle. So to attach, I will be using this little white hook from Dollar Tree. It has a sticky adhesive in the back, and it came in a pack of 12. So I hooked the wreath onto that first, and then I use that as my guide to determine where I want to place it down. I also picked up this adorable frosted berries and pine from Hobby Lobby. It was just under $1. It was 50% off. It's so pretty, and the frost, which are these really small clear beads, are not going to come off and make a mess. Next to that, I place a couple of these glass tea light candle holders from Dollar Tree, and I just place a couple battery-operated tea light candles inside. And we are done, and I just love the end result. I wanted to make a glass lantern, and so I went to the Dollar Tree looking through their jars, and there were so many great quality choices and options, and I decided to go with this glass jar. This is a little over 5.5 inch tall, but to me it actually feels bigger than that because it has a 4-inch diameter. I'll also be using these white marble accent stones. I open the package and drop the stones in the jar. As far as the amount, it really depends on you. I start off with about 1.5 inch in height. I'm going to be putting a votive candle in the middle, so I take a popsicle stick and move these stones around. I place the candle in the jar and drop some more stones all around it. On the top of the jar, I'm going to wrap this Canadian pine stem, which I got from Hobby Lobby, and I just wrap it on the top and then twist the ends to attach them together. And then I embellish with these little pine cones and berries from Hobby Lobby as well. So easy to make and I love how it turned out. For this DIY, I'll be using one of Dollar Tree's large 11.5-inch MDF snowflake. I'm going to stencil in some small snowflakes on the snowflake, and I thought this pattern was perfect. I get my stencils on Amazon, and I'll have this one linked below. I'm only going to stencil the ends where it branches into 3, kind of looks like a little arrow, and everywhere else I'm going to leave it as is. I start by placing the stencil in the area just right before it branches out, or the tip of the arrow, and I'm just using white acrylic paint. So I stencil that snowflake in, making sure to dab out as much of the paint as possible. Thin layers is a key to prevent bleeding. And then I apply that in circular motions with my stencil brush. I'm going to apply a full stencil all around the snowflake first, so 6 times. That way it gives the paint a little time to dry before stenciling around it. After that, I'm going to add some stenciling on the rest of the ends, whatever can fit on those narrow ends, just to make it look pretty. I'm going to embellish using these Dollar Tree snowy pine picks. I pulled out the pine needles from the stem. I'll be using about 6 or so, and I start by taking 2 and forming it into an L, and then taking some floral wire to tie the ends together. And I'm going to make 2 of these. Then I take 2 more and I tie the ends together so that it lays horizontally, and then I just attach them together so it kind of looks like a star. In the center, I'll be placing 3 of these little snowy pine cones. These have a wire in the bottom, so it was easy to attach on the pine needles. I add a few berries, and I place that in the center of the MDF snowflake, and I secure the whole thing with some floral wire. I attach a ribbon to hang, and this quick and easy DIY is done. For the next DIY, I'm going to make a Christmas wooden centerpiece box. You will need 40 tumbling tower blocks for this one. First, I glue 6 blocks together end to end, and I make 4 sets. Then I glue 2 together end to end, making 4 sets as well. I'm going to form a rectangle with 2 of the longer blocks and 2 single blocks. So I just glue the single blocks on the ends of the longer ones to form a rectangle, and I make 2 sets of these. Then I make 2 more rectangles with the smaller glued blocks, and these will make the sides of the blocks. I'm going to stain the wood with Waverly Antique Wax. I apply the wax with a foam brush, and then I immediately wipe off with a damp cloth. So I just continue applying it in small sections and then wiping it down. I like wiping it off with a damp cloth because it leaves it with a bit of a rustic finish, but you can paint or stain the wood whatever color you prefer. Now I still had some bamboo sticks left over and I wanted to use them up, so I'm going to place those on these smaller rectangles. I wanted to warm up the color a bit because it's currently a light grayish white, so I just rub on whatever antique wax was left on the damp cloth. And then I glue them on the smaller rectangle, 4 on each rectangle, spacing them out evenly. For the longer rectangle, I'm going to glue the ribbons on them. Now these ribbons are a little transparent, so I'm going to double them up, making sure the patterns match up. And then I just glue the sides together with hot glue. Now I noticed that if the nozzle directly touched the ribbon, it would singe the area that it touched, so I just had to make sure not to let the nozzle make any contact with the ribbon. So at this point, I just decided to switch off to Titebond multi-surface glue, which is a wonderful glue not only for wood but fabric as well. I apply the glue on the inner edge of the rectangle, and then I place the ribbon on top, making sure to pull the edges so that it goes on nice and tight. Then I do the same thing with the other rectangle, cutting off a strip of ribbon, doubling it up and gluing the sides, but this time with the multi-surface glue. I apply the glue on the inner edge and place the fabric down. To make the box, I stand the rectangles up and I apply glue on the sides of the smaller rectangles as well as on the edge of the larger ones. And then I bring them together to form the sides. For the base, you will need 4 tumbling tower blocks and 3 1-gallon paint stir sticks, which I trim to fit inside the box, and I apply Waverly antique wax on them to match. I glue 2 tumbling tower blocks on the smaller sides of the box. Now, since I trimmed the paint sticks to fit snugly in the box, it was a little difficult trying to fit it in because of the bamboo sticks on the sides. I could have trimmed them smaller, but I really didn't want to, so I just popped out one of the bamboo sticks, which made it easy to slide the paint stick in place. Then I glue that piece back in place and we are done. Wow, I really love the way this wooden box turned out. It makes a pretty centerpiece on your table, or use it to display some Christmas decor, flowers, greenery, or flameless candles. I love it. This 7-inch pine wood frame with a white wooden background from Michaels. I'll also be using this Christmas greenery with snow from Dollar Tree. I want the greenery to fit inside, so I trim off some of the stems so that it fits nicely inside. And then I take some jute wire from Dollar Tree and I wrap that around the base like so. I snip off the excess and then I add some hot glue on the back of the greenery and I place that down towards the left of the frame. You could also wrap a small piece of burlap for the base as well, and I think that would have been really pretty also. I hot glue some pine cones onto the greenery, giving it that beautiful and rustic woodland charm. And then I hot glue a little black and white bow that I made using some Dollar Tree ribbon on top of the jute wire. I got these little wooden letters from Michaels and I'm going to paint them in the shade Moss from Waverly, and it's going to spell out Joy to the World. Since the letters are small, I paint on the color with a fine brush. So to get an idea of spacing, I place the letters on the frame. As a guide, I place some tumbling tower blocks along the side and the base. And then I glue the letters down. And I'm using wood glue from Dollar Tree, and I'm just applying a very thin layer. The backboard of the frame is wood, so wood glue works perfectly. Once I'm done gluing the letters, I remove the tumbling blocks, and this beautiful and simple DIY is done. DIY is another quick one. I'll be using this beaded tassel from Dollar Tree. Now you can easily make this with some beads and jute string, or you can buy it already made for $1.25. On the other end of the tassel, I wanted to attach a nice little Christmas ornament, and so I headed to Dollar Tree. I picked out this adorable black and white ornament that says snow. I wanted to change up the embellishments on top. It's really not that bad, but I decided to replace it with some Christmas greenery that I thought looked a little better. And so I removed it and I just untwisted that wire that attached it to the ornament, and the whole thing came right out. I'm going to be using a couple of these Christmas stems. These are from Dollar Tree and I snip a few small pieces off. Then the only thing I didn't like about it was the glitter that was all over. Honestly, I tried my best to remove as much as I could. I used a small paintbrush and that worked pretty well. And so I just glue them on top. I ended up gluing back the bow that it came with, and then I added some little pine cones and berries. And these are from Hobby Lobby. For the tassel, I decided to wrap some red string to make the head, and I just used hot glue to secure that in place. And this quick and easy DIY is done. I'll be using this glass bowl from the Dollar Tree. Pottery Barn sells these beautiful brass bowls that have a gold and shiny color, and I love the simplicity of it. Like the first two DIYs, I'm going to add some texture to this. I'm just using white acrylic paint and I'm going to add some baking soda to it. And I want this to be very textury, so I do add quite a bit of baking soda. So I just brush it on all over. I don't paint the bottom just so I don't have to worry about it getting on the surface and it's not going to be seen. But I do paint the inside of the bowl because it's quite a big opening and sometimes I may not put anything in it. So once the first layer has dried, I add another layer, and this time I add a little more baking soda to the mixture because I want it to have a lot of texture. Now I will be spray painting this inside and out, so I'm not really worried about areas that I've missed because once it's spray painted, you won't even notice it. But if you want to leave it as is, which is so pretty as well, you can just go over those areas with paint. So I take it outside and I spray paint it gold. I let that dry completely and I'm done. What a transformation. It's so beautiful and elegant and such a pretty piece. For this DIY, I'll be using this wood slice hanger from Dollar Tree and this beautiful poinsettia napkin from Dollar Tree. I'm going to Mod Podge the napkin onto the wood. So first I remove the hanger and the staples. I pour some Mod Podge over the wood slice and I just use a brush to apply that on all over, making sure it gets right on the edge. And then I set that aside to dry completely. I'm going to trim the part of the napkin design that I want to use, so I just use a small paintbrush and I dip that in some water and then I outline the image. Next, I gently tear away the excess napkin. To create a softer, wispy edge, I grab a small wooden stick, a popsicle stick works too, and I delicately trim the napkin's edges a little more, and this will give it a softer edge, blending the napkin nicely onto the wood. Since the napkin is 2-ply, I remove the extra layer on the bottom, and I place that and position that on top of the wood. By now, the Mod Podge has completely dried. I place a piece of parchment paper on top, and then I just iron over that with my mini heat press in the lowest setting. If you don't have a heat press, you can use an iron, otherwise you can just place it right on top immediately after applying the Mod Podge. I just love this iron-on method because it leaves you with a smooth, wrinkle-free surface. I get a little sanding sheet and I sand down the edges to remove the excess napkin. Just look at how nicely the edge of the napkin blends with the wood. Now this part is optional, but I also lightly sand over the napkin just to make it look a little scratchy and distressed. I'm loving how it's looking so far. Then I just apply some more Mod Podge on top, and then I brush that on all over to seal the surface. Now I think you can leave it just like that, but I'm going to raise it up, and I'll be using a couple of these wooden blocks from Dollar Tree. I turn the wood slice over and I add some glue on the blocks and then I glue them in place. And this quick, easy, and stunning DIY is done. For this project, you will need 30 tumbling tower blocks. I'm going to add some color to the blocks with Waverly Antique Wax. With a damp cloth, I rub the wax on the blocks, except on the ends. I'm going to form a rectangle with 10 blocks. I start off gluing 3 blocks together end to end, so 2 sides of the rectangle will have 3 blocks and the other 2 will have 2 blocks. For the remainder blocks, I glue 5 together end to end, and I make 4 sets. Once the glue is dried, I'm going to glue the 4 sets of blocks, standing upright on the corners of the rectangle like so. To make the sides of this lantern, I'm going to measure and mark a bamboo stick from one end of a vertical block to the other. I'm going to measure and cut 5 for each side. You can also use popsicle sticks, dowels, or skewers. Once everything has been measured and cut, I hot glue the sticks onto the blocks, spacing them out evenly. I decided to use the bamboo sticks for the base, and I cut out 7 for the base. I spaced them out evenly and then I glue them down. Since we are heading towards winter, I decided to put several of these wooden snowflakes from the Dollar Tree onto the lantern. I cover up the hole with spackle, and then I paint it with white acrylic paint. And then I give it a light sanding. I glue the snowflakes onto the wider side of the lantern, and I just decided to glue 2 on the front. And we are done. A gorgeous lantern, perfect for this time of year, and so easy to make. DIY, I'm going to need 2 of these wooden trees, and I'm going to be making a 3-dimension tree out of them. I'm going to cut one of them in half, so I mark the center and then I score it several times with a utility knife. And it really doesn't take that long to cut because these trees are quite thin. To hide the holes on top, I'm going to cover them up with some spackle, so I apply a small amount and then I smooth it down. Now for the wooden trees that have been cut, I also add a little bit of spackle and I place a small popsicle stick on the side to keep the spackle in place. And then I give it some time to dry and harden. And the spackle covers up the holes nicely. I'm going to paint the trees in the shade Moss from Waverly chalk paint. It's such a pretty color. So I brush on the paint all over the wooden trees, the front, back, and sides. Now I'm only going to apply 1 coat of the paint, even letting some of that wood underneath to show through. For the half trees, I do try my best to not apply any of the paint on the sides where it's been cut, because I will be applying glue on that. Otherwise, you can also give it a light sanding. So once the paint has dried, I apply some wood glue on the cut sides, and I place that right in the center of the tree like so. I use a couple wood blocks to help hold it in place, especially since the wood is so thin and it won't stand up on its own. You can also combine with some hot glue, and that way you don't have to hold it in place for a few minutes. For the other half tree, I also apply the glue and I attach that to the opposite side. I also use the wood blocks to hold it in place. Now for more security, I'm going to add some skewers, so I paint them the same moss color. Now these skewers are quite thin. They're the ones from Dollar Tree, but I certainly could have gone with thicker ones. So I trim the skewers to the right size, and I also snip off some of that pointy tip. You can definitely sand the skewers down so that it looks nicely fitted. And then I just glue them in place. Now this part is optional, but to make a base for the tree, I'll be using some 3/4 inch square dowels, and I trim it and glue them together to form a cross for the tree to rest on. I grab a couple of these wooden stars and I trim one in half, and then I apply glue on the half side and I place that right in the center of the star. I add some glue on the bottom of the tree and I place that right on top of the cross. Now the tree needed some little friends and it looked lonely by itself, but instead of making more, I headed to Hobby Lobby and I grabbed this blank wooden tree craft kit. So I grabbed some neutral colors that I had on hand. For the larger tree, I'm giving it a coat of the lovely sandstone shade from Waverly. To speed up the painting process and give it more opacity, I'm using a round sponge brush. For the smaller one, I'm using the shade Espresso from Craftsmart, and this is their premium metallic acrylic paint. It goes on so beautifully and it has a little shimmer to it. For the last one, I'm using Khaki from Apple Barrel. So once the paint has dried, I connect the trees and they should fit in together smoothly. A few of the trees were slightly bent, which required a bit of extra effort to get them to snugly fit. Now the tips of the trees weren't as nice and pointy as I'd like, so I decided to wrap some jute string around the tip, which actually added a really nice detail to the trees. And we are done, and I couldn't be happier with the outcome. DIY, I'm going to make a super easy but super adorable ribbon ornament, and you're going to need some dowels or sticks, which is what I decided to use. And I'm going to use this adorable gingham ribbon from the Dollar Tree. I'm going to be cutting off strips of the ribbon, starting off with about 8 to 8.5 inches. I will be cutting off a total of 12 strips, cutting it a little shorter than the one cut prior, although you can certainly cut them all equal length and then trim them after, because we will be shaping it into a tree. To prevent the ends from fraying from all the handling, I apply a little Mod Podge on the ends. And then I just start tying them onto the stick, starting with the larger one and working my way up. You can certainly add different patterns and colors. I think that would have been pretty as well. Then I trim and shape the sides of the ribbons to form a Christmas tree. I wrap some jute twine on top and then I cut off the excess that I didn't want. For this one, I glued these mini pine cones and berries right on the top. And that is it for this one. A very quick and easy rustic Christmas ornament you can make. Place it on your tree or use it to embellish a gift. DIY, I'll be using a couple of these wooden dangling snowflakes from Dollar Tree. Each come with 4 snowflakes, so 8 total. I'll also be using a pack of those smaller wooden snowflakes as well. I'm going to make a wreath with them, so first I separate the larger snowflakes. And I place them in a circle. I'll be using 6 of the smaller snowflakes and I place them in between the larger, making sure the ends touch the larger ones. I'm using wood glue to attach them together and I'm just applying glue on the areas that will touch the larger snowflakes. Once it is completely dried, I turn it over and I apply a little hot glue on the back, securing it even more. I'm going to cover up any of the visible holes with a little bit of spackle. I'll be dry brushing some white paint over the wreath so the spackle will blend nicely. So I'm just dipping my brush in the white paint and then dabbing out the excess. And then I just apply the paint over the snowflakes, making sure not to go too heavy and letting the wood underneath show through. Now I thought it looked really nice with the white paint dry brushed, but then I changed my mind and I decided to paint everything white. So I just used a little round sponge brush, which made painting the whole wreath much faster. To embellish, you can add some berry picks or head to Dollar Tree's ornament sections. They have so many beautiful ornaments. And I'm going to be using this red and black Noel ornament. You can make a little hanger with some ribbon or twine. And this DIY is done, and I really love how it turned out. I'm going to make a wooden Christmas box, and I'll be using this 2 by 18-inch wood plank and a couple of these 7-inch rectangle planks from the Dollar Tree as well. I'm going to cut the 18-inch and 7-inch planks in half with a miter box and saw. To expedite cutting the 7-inch planks, I stack them and tape them together with painter's tape. And here are the measurements. To make the base of the box, I will be using these 10-inch popsicle sticks. You only need about 3 of these and a couple of this 1/4-inch square dowels. I will be trimming the popsicle sticks to about 3.5 inches. So I glue 2 together and I tape them together and clamp them. And I make sure they dry completely before moving on. I'm going to paint all the wood white with white acrylic paint, and I will be diluting the paint with water. I don't want the box to be completely opaque, but just have a nice wash of white while still seeing some of the wood patterns underneath. Because I will be gluing together to form a box, I do try my best to avoid the areas that I will be applying glue on, but you can also sand those areas a bit before gluing together. I picked up some decorative napkins at the Dollar Tree, and for this project I'm going to be decoupaging this beautiful poinsettia print onto the box. I really love the classic pattern on this one. So first I open up a napkin. This napkin has 2 plies, and so I remove the extra layer underneath, which I won't be using. You can also remove the extra layer right after you cut the napkin, which makes it easier to separate. I place the longer wood on top of the napkin to see which part to cut out. I do want the design to be continuous, and since the wood is too long for that, I cut the napkin in squares and I just play around with it, moving it around until I find a position that looks best. I mark it and cut that section out, extending about 1/4 inch more around the wood. And I cut 2 sets of that. For the smaller wood pieces, I do the same thing. I decided I wanted more of the greenery and less of the poinsettia. I will be gluing the napkin with Mod Podge with a matte finish, but you can certainly use whatever finish you prefer. I brush a layer of Mod Podge onto the wood. I make sure it's fully coated without overcoating it as well. Then I carefully place the napkin on top and gently smooth it out. And then I place a clear plastic over that. You can use Ziploc or plastic wrap, and I use that to smooth it out even more. For the longer wood, I glue it in sections since there are 2 pieces of napkin. I apply glue on one half and then I lay the napkin on top, smoothing it out and making sure the edges are pressed down. And then I apply the Mod Podge on the other half and then place the napkin on top, making sure the middle seam looks good. And then I smooth and flatten it out with the plastic, pressing down on any lumps. This will need to dry completely before moving on to the next step. Once the Mod Podge has fully dried, I'll be sanding off the edges, and I'm just going back and forth with a fine to medium grit sanding sheet and a sanding sponge. Now after sanding off the edges, you can leave it as is, but I really want to distress this, so I not only sand the edges but all over. The distressing gives it a beautiful vintage look. To glue the box together, I apply glue on the ends of the longer wood like so. And I stand it up and place a smaller wood in between. I do the same thing on the other side, placing the smaller wood in between. I use a carpenter square to make sure the corners are at a 90-degree angle, and I do gently clamp these and give it a little time to dry. And to make the base, I measure the square dowels to fit inside and I trim them down. So I apply glue and glue them down on the bottom sides like so. I did paint a couple sides of the dowels, leaving the side that will be glued unpainted. Then I place down the popsicle sticks, spacing them out evenly, and then I hot glue them down. And finally, I seal the whole thing with the Mod Podge, and I'm done. I grabbed one of these wooden Christmas DIY kits from Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to be using the trees, and the rest I'll be saving for another project. I also grabbed these bamboo rings from Dollar Tree. They come in a pack of 2, and I'll be using the larger of the 2. I'll be painting the trees in the shade moss from Waverly chalk paint. So I brushed that on all over the front of the trees. Since it's chalk paint, it does go on quite thick, so I do just about 1 coat of it. After it's dried, I place the ring on top of the trees, lining it so that it's centered or close to it. And then I just mark the bottom, and then I trim out the area that's sticking out outside the ring. Then I just add a little wood glue right on the bottom edge. And place the ring right on top of the trees, lining up the bottom. I also placed that piece of wood that was trimmed out on top, just so that the ring lies evenly. Before I add the string hanger, I wrap some white string on top, just a few inches in length, using a little hot glue to secure it in place. Then I add the string hanger, trimming off the excess. Now you can add some embellishments on top, but I love how clean and simple this looks. Grab 3 of these 2x18-inch wood planks from Dollar Tree. I'm going to make a stain using a couple acrylic paints, Territorial Beige and Khaki from Apple Barrel. I usually like to add more of the khaki color and then a few drops of the Territorial Beige to darken. And then of course some water to thin it down so that it'll go on like a stain. So I apply the stain 1 plank at a time, and then I wipe it down to remove any of the excess paint. I really love these 2 together. You get such a beautiful natural warm shade. Now I will be gluing these 3 planks together side by side, so I make sure not to apply any of the paint on those areas. Before I glue them together, I flip them over, and this will make sure that the surface will be nice and even. And then I apply some wood glue on the long sides. Once that's assembled and dried, I'm going to apply this Let It Snow stencil that I picked out from the stencil pack. Again, I will have that link below if you want to check it out. I'll be using crimson, red, and white chalk paint. I'm going to paint snow white and let it in red. And so first I want to secure the stencil on the wood, so I use some painter's tape to secure it in place. I'm going to paint Let It first, so I cover up the word snow. I load my stencil brush with chalk paint, and I make sure to remove or dab out any excess paint. This is a very important step. And I just apply the paint in circular motions until it's completely covered. After that, I carefully remove the painter's tape, and then I lightly press it over the word Let It. I really just want to cover up the edge of the word, and I don't want to push it down too hard. And then with a new brush, I brush on the white chalk paint over the word snow. Now for the word snow, I don't really apply it on too thick because I do want some of that wood underneath to show through. Once I'm done applying the paint, I carefully peel out the painter's tape, and then I remove the stencil, and wow, it's so pretty. Now if these wood pieces were longer, I would have loved to stencil in that snowflake on top. But it's not, so I'm going to instead add some embellishments with these Christmas greenery from Dollar Tree. I cut out a few, and then I'm just going to place them on the top right corner like so. I was going to add this adorable black and white ribbon from Dollar Tree to make a bow, but I changed my mind. Instead, I decided to go with just a few of these pine cones. I love the colors of these 2 together. It just gives it a natural, rustic farmhouse vibe. I also added a few berries as well. Underneath, I placed a wooden snowflake. This came in a pack from Dollar Tree, and I covered up the hole with spackle, and I brushed on some white. And this Christmas sign is done. The Dollar Tree has a huge variation of Christmas ornaments, and I'm going to use a couple of them for the next DIY. For this project, I picked up this glittery reindeer and this 2-pack of white shimmery trees. I will also be using another one of these wood planks. I removed the greenery and bow on the reindeer, and I'm going to switch that up with something else. I trimmed the wood to about 9 inches, then I placed the reindeer and trees on the wood so I can figure out the placement of them. And I like the way it looks with the reindeer in the middle and the trees on each side. The trees are angled on the bottom, so I decided to drill a little hole where I'm going to place them, not deep enough to hold it up on its own, just a little hole where I can place a glue in. You can also use a craft knife to carve it out even more. Now, if you don't want to drill a hole, you can also trim the base of the tree so that it lays flat. There are some holes on the top of the trees, so I cover it up with a little spackle. I'm going to cut a small piece of this Canadian pine, which I got at Hobby Lobby. It was about $1.50 for a pack of 24, and I'm going to wrap it around the reindeer's neck. I was going to put this bow on top of the pine. It is pretty, but I wasn't really sure if that's what I wanted on there, so I thought I would decide later. I'm going to paint the wood with white acrylic paint and thin it out with just a little bit of water. I do want it to go on thick, but not too thick. So I brush the paint on the wood with a foam brush, and then I wipe it off with a paper towel before it dries. And then once that dries, I give it a little sanding to give it a distressed look. Then I apply hot glue on the hole that I drill, and I place a tree in there and hold it in place for a few seconds until the glue sets. Then I glue down the other tree. I apply glue on the bottoms of the reindeer's feet and place it in the center. To cover up some of the gaps where the base of the tree was placed, I smooth in some spackle and then I immediately remove the excess with a foam brush. You can definitely leave it on there, it actually looks like snow. To elevate it, I paint 2 tumbling tower blocks and glue them right under. And that's it for this one. This came out so beautiful. I love that it's all white and shimmery, and it will definitely go with any Christmas decor. For this DIY, I'll be making a little table centerpiece, and I'll be using 3 of these Dollar Tree wooden crates. Now this part is optional, but I'm going to add some color, and I'll be painting it in the shade Territorial Beige from Apple Barrel, thinned out with a little bit of water so that it goes on like a stain. So I apply that on the crates, and I'm just using a brush, and then I wipe it down right away. The color is going to dry much lighter than what you're seeing because it was thinned out with water. But you can definitely paint it any color, a darker stain, or even red for this time of year, or leave it as is. You really can't go wrong with whatever color you choose. You can glue these together permanently, but I'm actually not going to do that. I'm just going to push them together so that it's one piece with the option to keep them separate. I'll be using 3 of these battery-operated wax pillar candles that I got at Dollar Tree. These are really nice, and because of the wax, they feel like real candles. I'm going to place them inside each of the crates. I'll be using these pine stems again, and I'm going to pull out the pine needles. I use about 3 stems or bouquets, but you can make this as full as you want. And I just tuck those inside the crates surrounding the candles. How easy is this? Now you can keep it simple just like this. Personally, I love it just like this, or you can add some berries and pine cones as well. You can keep these together as one, or spread them apart. Either way, this quick and simple rustic decor is beautiful. I'll be using some giant craft sticks and this hanging wall shelf from Dollar Tree. I really only need the wood part, so I will save the rest of the accessories for another project. First, I'm going to warm up the wood, and I'm going to mix Territorial Beige and Khaki, thinned out with a little bit of water. So I apply that on with a rag on top as well as on the sides, and then I just wipe out any excess paint so that you can see the wood underneath. Acrylic paint does dry pretty fast, so I try not to let it sit too long before wiping it down. I'm going to use some of that leftover decorative paper from the previous DIY, and I'm only going to need about 5 inches of it. I'm going to Mod Podge that towards the bottom So I apply a thin layer of the Mod Podge, about the size of the paper, but also making sure to extend a bit beyond that. Once that's dried, I'm going to adhere the paper on top, but before I do that, I'm going to trim down these giant popsicle sticks to the width of the wood. So I just line the popsicle sticks and I place the wood right on top to measure the amount I need to trim off. Then I place the paper right on top of the dried Mod Podge, and I place some parchment paper on top. And with a low heat setting, I iron over the parchment paper, which will heat up the Mod Podge and make it tacky. To seal, you just do the same process on top of the decorative paper, and now you have a wrinkle-free Mod Podge paper. I'm going to do some gold leafing on the popsicle sticks, and I'll be using the Speedball metal leaf adhesive and imitation gold leaf that I got on Amazon. So I just apply a thin layer of the adhesive on top of the popsicle sticks, and I'm just doing one side. After that, I'm going to give it about 20 minutes to dry, or until it gets completely tacky. Then I pull out a sheet of the imitation gold leaf and I flip it over the popsicle sticks to stick them on top of the gold leaf, and I can get about 3 on each of the sheet. I smooth it out a bit and then I just gently brush out the excess gold leaf. Now, since it's not real gold, you will need to seal it because it can tarnish over time. I like to use a glossy sealer because if you do matte, it will dull down the color. And then I just hot glue them down. I glue one on the bottom to cover up the holes. I turn over the wood and then I glue down the remaining 3 spaced out evenly while also making sure to cover up the edge of the paper. And since the popsicle sticks are a bit curved, I make sure to hold down the popsicle sticks for a bit so that it dries flat. I use my Cricut to cut out Joy to the World, and I'll be placing that on that open area. I love how simple it is, but you can definitely place a little wreath on top as well. I really love the gold detail and I didn't want to cover it up. And this DIY is done. 4 of the 12-inch 1x2s, which I got at Dollar Tree. Now they all need to be equal in size because I am going to be making a frame and I really don't want to trim anything down. So while I was at Dollar Tree, I just made sure that the pieces of wood that I got were all equal in size, and that will just save me a lot of time on this project. First thing I do is grab some paint colors, and I'm using Territorial Beige and Khaki from Apple Barrel. I'm going to apply it like a stain, so I just mix the 2 colors together, and then I add some water to thin it down. I use a little rag to apply it all over, and I make sure to wipe out the excess so that you can see the wood patterns underneath. For the tree, I will be painting it white, but since I want some of the wood underneath to show through, I rub on some of that stain color on top first. The natural color is so light, and it'll just end up blending with the white paint. So once that completely dries, I start brushing on the white chalk paint. I just do about a layer of it, not too heavy, and then I just put that aside to dry completely before I give it a light sanding. To make the frame, I'm just going to glue the 4 pieces of wood together to form a rectangle, with the 2 vertical sides glued in between the ends of the other 2. I use some painter's tape to clamp it and hold it together while it dries. I also use a carpenter's square ruler just to make sure that all the corners are at a 90-degree angle. After lightly sanding the tree, it's time to put everything together. The tree is slightly too wide for the frame, so I trim a tiny bit off the wooden tree. And then I turn the side of the frame that I like down with the back side up, and then I apply some glue on the areas of the tree that hits the frame. And then I turn the tree over and glue it in place. The simple rustic tree silhouette frame is complete, and I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed creating alongside me and found some inspiration for your own Christmas decor. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more creative DIY content, and hit that bell icon to stay up to date with my latest projects. Until next time, bye!